How can one sunny favor on a crowded beach end with a process server reading my name in a lobby? Why did my circle laugh when I called it harmless sunscreen, then vanish when temporary orders were spoken? What happens when the quiet husband I mocked decides to follow the rules, document everything, and let the law speak? My name is Ianthe Crowell, and this is my bright beach mistake. I work as a reservations coordinator, where smiles feel like armor against criticism. I married Caleb Drayton, a calm history teacher who prefers quiet, careful rooms. I told him beaches are communal, and help from strangers is normal etiquette. I believe openness proves confidence, and confidence protects love from becoming small and stale. On the promenade, a lifeguard named Rafe offered sunscreen with playful ease. I turned my back, thinking kindness could replace boundaries without hurting anyone. Caleb saw the scene, and he said I crossed a clear line. I called it harmless, and I said he misunderstood modern trust and bodies. Friends supported me online, while his mother asked whether respect still mattered. My mother posted crowns, insisting confidence scares people who dislike sunlight and attention. Later he grew distant, organized folders, and placed mugs on separate counters. I kept filming cheerful reels, promising explanations that would fix everything by dinner. I thought applause could heal us, but the lobby answered louder than captions. He said he would handle it properly and avoided every scene. I kept smiling for cameras, pretending documentation could never outrun charisma online. Morning began with ocean light sneaking across our kitchen tiles while the kettle hissed softly. I set 2 mugs on opposite counters, pretending symmetry was style, not a quiet border. Caleb entered with school papers and asked about sunscreen plans, using a voice built for classrooms. I answered that beaches were communal spaces, and neighborly help made summer simple and friendly. He asked whether help meant strangers touching skin, and whether boundaries mattered even under sunlight. I said boundaries could be flexible with context, and community kindness trained everyone toward trust. He suggested we bring spray instead, and he said he preferred private help between spouses. I laughed gently and said my shoulders were not secrets, only surfaces that needed care. He wiped crumbs in calm circles and said respect began with small choices before crowds. I scrolled my phone and rehearsed captions that sounded informative, bright, and impossible to criticize. Juno texted that sunscreen reels always perform, and she said I should invite playful moments. Nora messaged crowns and said confidence scares people who worship shadows and old rules. May left a voicemail asking if kindness could lead first, and I deleted it unread. The refrigerator held a curling sticky note reading, "Bring forms," written in Caleb's tidy script. I assumed parent paperwork because he often helped families navigate permission slips and lost documents. On the wall planner, a red-circled date glowed like a lighthouse nobody acknowledged, especially me. Caleb's watch buzzed and flashed downtown 7:50 p.m., then dimmed as he clicked dismiss. I asked nothing, choosing a trust that did not audit every moment like a suspicious accountant. He opened the hallway desk, and the drawer clicked locked when I stepped into the doorway. I joked that secrets were childish, and he answered that privacy protected peace during tense weeks. I filmed a practice line beside the window, praising community care and modern beach etiquette. The morning tasted like lime and toast, and even my phone camera seemed kinder. Caleb stacked mail into columns labeled household and personal, then aligned them like small, obedient soldiers. He asked whether I planned any stunts, and I said teaching sometimes uses demonstrations carefully. He nodded without comment, then placed separate towels on the bathroom rail with measured precision. I told myself he loved theatre and that the towels were simple hotel habits. He returned to the table and brewed fresh tea, steam blurring his reflection on glass. I opened our shared album and glimpsed a spreadsheet with initials and dates and neat times. I told myself teachers adore tables, and tables comfort anxious minds when feelings become noisy storms. The printer spooled once in the hallway and spat a blank page like a shrug. Caleb removed it, checked the tray, and said maintenance sometimes required patience and repetition. I tested another caption about honesty under sunlight, and framed it as protective education for couples. Juno suggested a carousel with headings about safety, community, and resilient marriages under friendly skies. I saved drafts to a folder labeled Beach Script Polished, and I added a pastel thumbnail. Caleb asked if lunch would be early, and I said deployment tickets might keep me later. He nodded again and opened a window 2 inches, letting salt air pull worry outward. I imagined the promenade glowing like a stage and pictured Rafe without using his name aloud. I told myself a stranger's help could model trust, and trust could train hesitant partners. Caleb checked the guest room and straightened the duvet, which already looked painfully perfect and smooth. I asked if he slept there again, and he said rest helped complicated conversations remain civil. I answered that speeches help even more because structure carries feelings across noisy tables safely. He cleaned his glasses and watched me edit a reel, saying audiences often mistake exposure for care. I replied that visibility wins hearts, and I said transparency builds safety against small-minded suspicion. He looked at the balcony plants as if counting leaves might anchor a drifting conversation. The kettle clicked off, and the room settled into a polite hush I disliked. My mother texted that queens do not ask permission for lotion, only results and shine. May texted Caleb again, and his phone lit with a preview he dismissed immediately. I filmed another clip promising that boundaries and brightness can live together when adults cooperate. He placed a thin binder labeled utilities on the shelf, and it looked thicker than bills. I decided preparation soothed him, and I told myself the order was just his private ritual. A muted call lit his screen as private while he stepped into the hallway deliberately. I posed near the window and practiced a smile that read, generous, informed, and untouchable. He returned, placed his pillow on the guest bed, and smoothed the corners twice. I packed beach spray anyway because practicality photographs well beside brave captions and cheerful confidence. He said breakfast was finished, and he asked for quiet later to grade quizzes. I said of course, and I added a heart to soften edges he might resent. The guest door closed with a careful latch that sounded like punctuation at the wrong time. My phone vibrated with an unknown number, blinking once, then clearing itself like a swallowed thought. I stared at the suddenly blank screen and told myself nothing important had changed today. I reached the office early and let the open plan quiet wrap around my shoulders. Monitors woke like small lakes, and keyboards started ticking with that soft insect confidence. Kim waved from content, asking if the beach carousel still needed warmer captions today. I said warmth sells honesty, and honesty fixes panic before people invent suspicious stories. She suggested pastel headers and fewer exclamation points, because executives fear loud punctuation during audits. I laughed and said hospitality requires sparkle, even when audit eyes lean over shoulders. Slack lit with a thread about boundaries, and I typed that context shapes meaning responsibly. A coworker replied that cameras misread context, and I promised careful framing and consent reminders. Samir, my manager, strolled past and asked about scheduled posts tied to company locations. I answered that personal reels would not tag the hotel, only general beach vibes. He nodded, polite but tight, and reminded me brand integrity matters even off-duty appearances. I promised restraint, then added a sun emoji, which made him smile without commitment. Kim brought a ring light from the media closet and asked for a rehearsal line. I said sunscreen help proves community, and community teaches trust across nervous marriages needing sunlight. She grimaced slightly, then said, maybe remove the marriage part for safer messaging guidelines. I pretended to consider it, then whispered the line again with softer verbs. The printer coughed behind reception, and someone thumped the tray like a sleepy drum. I opened our home album on break and glimpsed a spreadsheet with initials and dates. Rows held patient timestamps and columns looked calm, like rails guiding difficult conversations without drama. I told myself teachers adore tables, and tables keep storms from swallowing a household. Kim pointed to my phone and asked why my spouse tracked time so carefully. I said grading rubrics train his brain, and he loves patterns more than gossip. My inbox chimed with a calendar share titled, Meeting, Personal 5:35 a.m. tomorrow. I dismissed it as coaching prep, since he mentors rookies who panic before midterms. A maintenance tech rolled a cart and left a small envelope near the copier. Nobody claimed it, so it sat like a quiet question with a paper spine. Back at my desk, a thin binder labelled Utilities waited beside my keyboard suddenly. The spine looked thicker than bills, with neat flags shining like small traffic lights. I moved it to the drawer and told myself curiosity could wait for evening. Priya from HR appeared at my cube and asked for a quick private conversation. We walked into the glass room where plants looked like props for sincere apologies. Priya said several posts mixed personal intimacy with employer-adjacent locations and recognizable colleagues. I answered that hospitality celebrates community and sunscreen is health, not intimacy, under sunny crowds. She asked me to avoid filming near staff uniforms and lobby signage for now. I promised compliance, then added that women's comfort often gets mislabeled by anxious optics watchers. Priya remained neutral and recommended clarity with my spouse before public experiments invite confusion. I said clarity was scheduled for dinner and education worked better with friendly witnesses. Leaving HR, I messaged Juno about a caption series explaining common beach etiquette misunderstandings. She loved the pitch and suggested a Q&A card about couples and sunscreen. I typed a draft claiming that boundaries breathe, and breathing requires sunlight and practice. Kim asked if Rafe would appear, and I pretended not to recognize the name. She raised an eyebrow, then shrugged and moved the ring light toward a better angle. Samir sent a polite reminder that personal accounts still reflect on the hotel's brand. I replied with gratitude, promised caution, and attached a sample caption with a toned-down sparkle. Slack pinged again as last summer's rooftop reel resurfaced with mixed comments and nervous emojis. I wrote that adults can disagree politely, and learning hurts before it improves marriages. A colleague whispered that my husband looked sad in those clips, and I deflected. I said stoic faces protect privacy, and privacy is a valid boundary during growth. The office air conditioner sighed, and a paper mobile tapped softly like a tired metronome. I refilled water, then opened browser tabs for storage options, delivery tracking, and notary near me. I told myself efficiency proves maturity, and maturity prevents chaos from eating hopeful intentions. A Cloud Sync pop flashed file uploaded successfully across my home folder snapshot thumbnail. For a second I felt a chill, like waves moving under an anchored boardwalk. I shook it off and added alt text to every planned slide for accessibility. Kim asked to see the thumbnail batch, and I showed her beach script polished. She said the pastel gradient helped, but the copy still pushed uncomfortable intimacy. I replaced intimacy with assistance, and I swapped touching for applying carefully with consent. Samir reappeared and asked whether captions mentioned my spouse's job or the school name. I assured him no identifiers would appear, and brand risk stayed minimal and contained. He thanked me, then asked for follow-up on guest response times before the end of day. I answered cheerfully, then watched my phone vibrate with a missed call without caller ID. The screen pulsed once and cleared, leaving my reflection floating over unread numbers. I checked my calendar and shifted the beach reel to late afternoon posting. Kim typed that golden hour improves empathy, which improves comment tone during heated debates. I staged a quick rehearsal near the lobby fern and practiced a softer smile. Priya walked by and nodded, as if grateful for reduced volume around sensitive narratives. Slack erupted with a coworker tagging me in an old party photo again. I pivoted to my keyboard and drafted replies about education, consent, and public kindness. Across the floor, phones began chiming in a jittery chorus as notifications multiplied. Samir stopped at the aisle with a careful expression and invited me to his office. He said the manager needed a quick word right now about optics and tonight's plans, just as tagged previews for my beach teaser started pinging across screens. The promenade glittered like a postcard, and the sun pressed gently on everyone's shoulders while vendors shouted about cold drinks and rented umbrellas. I walked beside Juno with our totes swinging, and she filmed the boardwalk as if the ocean had personally invited her channel to dinner tonight. Caleb carried the spray can and a folded beach chair, and he said we should set up by the lifeguard flag because currents change without warning. I answered that a little walk toward the music would help us feel social, and I promised captions later that would explain friendly etiquette for crowded beaches. Rafe leaned against the surfboard rack with sunblock stripes on his nose, and he grinned at tourists like a lighthouse that smiled back when you waved. Juno said golden hour was hours away, but she wanted a test reel, and she asked if I could demonstrate safe application for hard-to-reach places. Caleb said we already packed spray and a small mirror, and he held both like props that knew their roles better than we did. I said, community care teaches trust, and trust grows healthier marriages than private suspicion. And Juno hummed approval because that line sounded thoughtful on camera. Rafe heard the last words and lifted the bottle, and he offered help with the relaxed politeness of people whose jobs include smiling at strangers every day. I paused for exactly 2 beats, then nodded and faced the water, and Juno framed me carefully so the scene looked bright, clean, and purely educational. Caleb stood to my left with the spray still in his hand, and he said the spray would work fine if we stepped under the umbrella for shade. I said shade could wait, and I said the bottle was already open, and the crowd near the boardwalk steps glanced our direction like gulls noticing a possible snack. Rafe spread a line on my shoulders with careful fingers, and I used my prepared sentence about sunscreen being healthy, not intimacy, when performed with decent manners. A teen lifted his phone and whispered that the hotel lady was doing tutorials, and someone else shouted to tag accounts and add the lifeguard's handle for fun. Caleb lowered the spray and exhaled like someone finishing a slow count to 10, and he walked 3 paces back to stop the umbrella from flipping into the surf. I said the demonstration showed kindness in action and could help anxious couples relax, and my voice stayed even because I had practiced that evenness in our kitchen. Rafe thanked me for educating the beach, and Juno laughed because the phrase sounded like a cheesy poster from health class. A bright camera flash popped from the stairs, and voices scattered like beads from a broken bracelet, and someone called the moment wholesome while another called it provocative. Caleb fixed the umbrella rope and then looked at the waterline like a teacher checking attendance, and he said we should reapply later because timers work when people forget. I said timers were great, and I said community reminders helped even more, and I asked Juno to grab a final shot where I point toward the open sky. Rafe retreated to the rental stand with a shrug that said no hard feelings, and Juno slid her phone into a bag with the proud grin of a producer who just captured a perfect opener. Caleb put on his headphones and moved a few steps toward the quieter end of the promenade, and his face settled into the kind of calm that frightened me more than shouting would. He held his phone low, and the reflection in the screen showed a document shape, like a pale rectangle, and his thumb flicked once as if taking a photo for later. I saw a contact name appear with only a single emoji instead of letters, and I remembered how he sometimes renamed groups when they stressed him during grading season. Juno nudged me and said we should do a follow-up asking viewers about boundary misunderstandings, and I said perfect, while watching Caleb nod at nothing in particular. A small buzz lit his watch, and I read the words downtown 3:30 p.m. as he tapped dismiss with the same motion he used when silencing alarms before school mornings. I told him that we could grab iced tea by the pier if he wanted shade, and he tilted his head like someone listening to words spoken from far away. Juno whispered that my husband looked quiet in a dangerous way, and I said quiet only means careful processing when adults face contagious emotions in public. Caleb walked to the boardwalk railing and watched the lifeguard tower without looking at us, and Rafe jogged past with a board under his arm like the scene had never happened. I told Juno we would post with captions about health, consent, and shared routines, and she said we should also ask a playful question about who applies sunscreen at home. We shot 2 more clips near the planted palms and the painted bike lane, and I smiled a smile that felt like the right shape but lacked a heartbeat. People commented in real time with hearts and flame icons, and one comment asked where Caleb's face went when the lifeguard appeared with his easy grin. I typed that sometimes shy people step back during crowded moments, and I promised a dinner talk later with clearer language and kinder tone for everyone. Rafe waved from the kiosk and mouthed good luck, and Juno reminded me to use the pastel gradient because it softened edges without lying outright. Caleb pocketed his phone and gathered the chair, and he lifted Juno's tote as if carrying weight for a stranger required less effort than carrying disappointment for a wife. We drifted from the promenade toward the hotel strip, where the club doors breathed cool air, and Juno said one celebratory drink would smooth the algorithm and my nerves. Inside, the lights were low and friendly, and the bartender poured sparkling water with a lime wheel that looked like staged honesty. I explained to a circle of co-workers that sunscreen was hygiene and not romance, and I said confusion comes from old scripts that fear open daylight. A woman from accounting frowned into her glass and said the video might feel like humiliation if your partner looked sad, and I said sadness misreads education during transitions. Caleb stood near the lobby elevators with his headphones resting on his neck, and he talked softly while Coach Riley nodded with hands in his pockets like a referee off duty. Juno asked if we should invite them to the patio for a quick reset shot, and I said yes because composure performs kindness when everyone can see it. We stepped outside to the smoking area where sea breeze swirled last year's gossip, and I began a second speech about mutual respect, daily SPF, and the power of gentle transparency. Caleb set the chair beside the door and he met my eyes for a brief second that felt longer than the afternoon, and then he checked his watch again. A clear elevator bell sounded from the hallway, and he moved toward the opening doors without raising his voice or accusing anyone of anything. Juno lifted her phone, and the patio crowd paused the way crowds pause when weather changes suddenly, and I noticed how quiet my own breath had become. The bell chimed once more as he stepped inside, and a flash from the entrance camera blinked white across the glass like a small storm. The doors slid together on his calm reflection, and I felt the words for my next clip scatter like gulls rising from a broken picnic. I told Juno we would finish this properly at dinner with a full explanation, and she nodded, while the club noise faded into a strange, respectful hush. Morning arrived with the pickup lines shimmering in heat, and parents formed careful lanes while cones blinked like tiny lighthouses guarding tempers. Caleb stood beside Coach Riley with a clipboard, and the top page showed only statement in calm block letters above empty lines. I praised community order and said education worked best outdoors, but he kept scanning tags and calling buses with quiet, practiced gestures. A mother asked about the beach reel, and I said sunscreen is hygiene, and couples benefit from public reminders. A father muttered about dignity in marriage, and I replied that growth sometimes scratches pride before wisdom smooths it later. Dismissal ended with whistles and shouts, and Caleb checked his watch as a tile flashed downtown 11:15 a.m. briefly. He nodded to Riley, lifted the stop sign, and walked past me like weather that refuses to argue about clouds. At the supermarket, fluorescent lights hummed and carts clicked, while whispers travelled faster than the sale on late strawberries. Juno avoided the bakery aisle and texted that optics tightened again, and she suggested silence until reactions softened. I placed a celebratory cake in the cart and said sugar calms relatives and algorithms when they demand proof of love. Near produce, a neighbour asked whether Caleb seemed respected at home, and I said, respect looks different during modern education. The neighbour stared at the cart and said some lessons feel like punishment, then turned away before I polished an answer. Back home, lemon cleaner drifted through the hallway, and faint printer toner rode the air like a private weather report. Caleb sat at the table with his laptop, and tabs showed storage options, delivery tracking, and notary near me in a neat row. He minimized the window when I approached, and 2 mugs waited on opposite counters like borders nobody dared redraw this week. A new key glinted on his ring, plain and practical, and he set it beside his watch without commentary. The guest bed looked freshly smoothed with corners tucked tight, and a soft shredder hum pulsed once from behind the closed door. On the desktop, a clean tree labelled Archive A and Archive B appeared, and a cloud sync pop declared file uploaded successfully with cool confidence. I offered a bargain and said I would delete reels if he praised my courage, and I promised warmer captions about mutual kindness. He breathed slowly, met my eyes, and said bargaining twists truth, then asked for quiet dignity while decisions matured without audiences. I called silence a weapon and said viewers misjudge blank spaces, but he shook his head and closed the laptop carefully. He set a phone alarm that flashed paper drop and tapped it off, then folded laundry like a patient referee sorting flags. I asked whether reconciliation needed a new script, and he said responsibility needed actions, not scripts, then adjusted the towels again. I moved closer and said misunderstanding ruined sunny days, and he answered that the context was clear enough for anyone willing to see. He placed the clipboard flat on the counter, traced the word statement once, and returned it to the guest room without hurry. I reached for the cake and said sweetness could reset the tone tonight, but he only straightened the forks and checked the window latch. The house settled into a careful quiet that felt like a hallway before a bell, and even my captions looked smaller on the screen. I said the stranger's hands meant nothing, and he said our promises meant something, then lifted his bag and stood by the door. He watched me like a teacher waiting for a final answer, and I gave him sentences shaped like excuses and elegant lighthouse metaphors. He listened, then nodded once and said he would handle everything properly, and the latch clicked behind him while my phone lit with a new preview. The courthouse lobby breathed recycled air and skylight glare, and the noon crowd moved like a tide between benches and security lines. I arrived with Juno's tote because habit clung to me, planning a reset selfie before lunch to show calm, corrective maturity. Security asked my purpose, and I said I was meeting my sister to settle optics and answer kind questions. A marble clock clicked with strict patience, and the elevators chimed in a rhythm that felt like a metronome counting breaths. Juno texted that silence might be wiser than posts, and I typed that winners control timelines and tone when storms seek bigger waves. A man in a dark blazer approached, confirmed my name, and kept his expression steady, like someone balancing paperwork on windless water. He introduced himself as a process server, asked me to remain where we stood, and said witnesses were present for accuracy. I answered, this was theatre for strangers, and he replied that procedures reduce theatre, because records outlast performances. He said service would occur here in the open lobby with time noted, and he read my name clearly enough to echo off tile. He handed a packet and stated divorce petition, temporary financial and possession orders, and a communication boundary during the process beginning immediately. A receptionist stopped typing mid-sentence, and a guard turned his head with the same neutral kindness I hated at school assemblies. I said the sunscreen moment was health, not intimacy, and he answered that labels do not matter when conduct breaks clear promises. Across the lobby, Caleb stood beside Coach Riley with measured posture, and he acknowledged service with a small nod rather than any lines for a crowd. He set a slim envelope on the security desk, and the officer slid it toward me while describing a communication schedule for necessary logistics only. The server summarized access rules for shared items, noted possession of the apartment during certain windows, and explained financial responsibilities while proceedings moved forward deliberately. He recorded the time, asked a guard to witness, and spoke with the calm cadence of people who never need applause. I said the public format felt cruel, and he replied that privacy had been available before cameras, captions, and helpful hands on crowded beaches. Someone near the benches whispered that consequences finally replaced reels, and another murmured that dignity walked better without hashtags. Juno texted an exclamation mark, then nothing, and my phone followed with a cloud sync ping that displayed Archive A and Archive B updated successfully. Caleb thanked security for their patience, turned toward the elevators with Riley, and paused only long enough to hold the door for an elderly couple. I took a step forward and said the misunderstanding ruined sunny days, and the server repeated that procedures were now active and instructions were already in the packet. Pens hovered above clipboards at the reception station, and the marble floor felt colder than any ocean I had used for metaphors. Caleb did not look angry or triumphant, only finished, like a teacher marking the last answer and stacking the tests face down. The elevator bell sounded again, bright and final, and the doors closed on his reflection while phones tilted upward just enough to catch the moment. I held the packet against my ribs as if warmth could soften paper, and the schedule envelope waited on the counter with its tidy, unforgiving lines. The server thanked security for their cooperation, noted the time again, and turned away while the lobby swallowed the lingering noise from my unsent captions.